These are the stories of two sets of visitors. Came by someone's house, and they're guests. They're invited into the house. But their visits have very different outcomes. There's reasons for that. One of the reasons is because one set of visitors was sent by heaven itself. The other set of visitors was on its way to hell. We'll start with the first, Genesis 19, 1 through 23. We have the story of the destruction of Sodom. Here we arrive at Sodom. We know the backstory to this. Abraham was by his tent in the middle of the day. 3 men showed up. The Bible is ambivalent about exactly who these 3 men are. It at one point calls them 3 men, but at another point calls them angels, and at another point identifies one of the men as God. And that is just an ambivalence that we have to take into account when we're reading this. There's no way to necessarily clear that up, and it doesn't really matter exactly, except that we know that the 2 that go on after God goes up from them, the 2 that go on to Sodom appear to be angels, but they have the appearance of men. They don't have wings or anything like this. They just look like ordinary men. And we know that at this point, Lot is living in Sodom. We don't know if that has anything to do with why it was that Abraham bargained for Sodom the way that he did. When God told him, I'm going there to investigate and see if things are as bad as I hear they are. And if so, I'm going to destroy the city. And Abraham bargains with God about how many righteous people need to be found in the city for him not to destroy it. Starts, I believe, with 50 and bargains him down to 10. Well, Lot is living there, and to me, it's a little bit of a mystery why. Lot and Abraham are both very rich at this point. In Genesis 13, their herds both had gotten so large, and their relative staff levels for their herdsmen, for their flocks, had gotten so big that there wasn't room for both of them. And so they separated, and Abraham gave Lot the entire Jordan plain to himself to go and be a herdsman on it. Genesis 14 came the war of the 9 kings. Lot was kidnapped, but Abraham went and rescued him. And now Lot is impervious, or at least he ought to be. Abraham, for all means and purposes, is the king of Canaan. And Lot is there living in Canaan. And he's very rich, has these large herds. But oddly, here in Genesis 19, he seems to have sold his herds, or he's hired someone else to manage them. He's doing something, but he's living in Sodom. All of a sudden, he's a city dweller. Doesn't make any sense to me, but that's how we find him. Then we come to Genesis 19. That evening, the 2 angels came to the entrance of the city of Sodom, and Lot was sitting there as they arrived. When he saw them, he stood up to meet them and welcomed them. Sirs, he said, come to my home as my guest for the night. You can get up early as you like and be on your way again. Oh, no thanks, they said. We'll just stretch out here along the street. But it was very urgent, until at last they went home with him. And he set a great feast before them, complete with freshly baked unleavened bread. After the meal, as they were preparing to retire for the night, the men of the city, yes, Sodomites, young and old, from all over the city, surrounded the house and shouted to Lot, bring out those men to us so we can rape them. Lot stepped outside and talked to them, shutting the door behind him. "Please, fellows," he begged, "don't do such a wicked thing. Look, I have 2 virgin daughters, and I'll surrender them to you to do with as you wish, but leave these men alone, for they're under my protection." "Stand back," they yelled. "Who do you think you are? We let this fellow settle among us, and now he tries to tell us what to do. We'll deal with you far worse than with those other men." Then they lunged at Lot and began breaking down the door. But the 2 men reached out and pulled Lot in and bolted the door, and temporarily blinded the men of Sodom so that they couldn't find the door. And I find this very interesting, that Lot puts forth, he proffers his 2 daughters in place of this man. We don't know exactly what he's thinking, exactly why he did this. I've heard a lot of rationales about the importance of hospitality, and that Lot had brought these men under his roof beam, and he didn't want them to be insulted. He didn't want to be insulted, didn't want to fail to protect them. I'm thinking perhaps also this is just looks like a no-win situation to Lot, and perhaps he's just thinking some of us can survive, and he's trying to just figure out a way forward. Whatever his reasoning, the 2 visitors don't accept that. They don't allow the daughters to be sacrificed. They pull Lot back inside, and they shut the door, and they blind the men who are outside till they save these daughters of Lot. They say, "What relatives do you have here in this city?" And the men asked, and they said, "Get them out of this place, sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone else, for we will destroy the city completely. The stench of the place has reached to heaven, and God has sent us to destroy it." So Lot rushed out to tell his daughter's fiancés, "Quick, get out of the city, for the Lord is going to destroy it." But the young men looked at him as though he had lost his senses. At dawn, the next morning, the angels became urgent. "Hurry," they said to Lot. "Take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here and get out while you can, or you will be caught up in the destruction of the city." When Lot still hesitated, the angels seized his hand and the hands of his wife and his 2 daughters and rushed them to safety outside the city, for the Lord was merciful. "Flee for your lives," the angels told him, "and don't look back. Escape to the mountains. Don't stay down here on the plain, or you will die." "Oh, no, sirs, please," Lot begged. "Since you've been so kind to me and saved my life, and you've granted me such mercy, let me flee to that little village over there instead of into the mountains, for I fear disaster in the mountains. See, the village is close by, and it's just a small place. Please, please let me go there instead. Don't you see how small it is? And my life will be saved." "All right," said the angel, "I accept your proposition and won't destroy the little city, but hurry, for I can do nothing until you are there." From that time, the little city was named Zor, meaning little city. The sun was rising as Lot reached the village. Then the Lord rained down fire and flaming tar from heaven upon Sodom and Gomorrah and utterly destroyed them along with the other cities and villages of the plain, eliminating all life, people, plants, and animals alike. But Lot's wife looked back as she was following along behind him and became a pillar of salt. Well, here we've got Lot, an old man in Sodom, and he gets these 2 visitors, these 2 guests, and the guests are sent from heaven, and the guests rescue Lot from hell. There's another story very much like this in Judges 19. Now, you're familiar with this story too, although it's less familiar, it's less well known than the story of Sodom. And this is the story of the Levite at Gibeah and the event that took place there. Now, as we read this story, it really matters what you think of the Levite from the outset, because there are a number of passages, a number of words in this passage that admit of multiple meanings. And the context really matters as to how you translate these words. And there are two schools of thought in this passage, and you go and you look at Bible Gateway and look at different translations of this passage. Some of them translate this as though the Levite is a good guy, as though he's an upright man, and that his wife, his concubine, is a scapegrace, and that his actions are good and righteous and understandable. But there's another group of translators who begin with the assumption that the Levite is not a good guy, that he's a scapegrace, that he's a scoundrel. Now, the question is, which of these points of view is correct? Well, only one of the points of view has any historical backing, and that is the point of view that this Levite is a scapegrace, that he's a scoundrel, that he's up to no good. There's a long rabbinical tradition about that they believe that this Levite was not a good man, that he had no good intention from the beginning. And that is how this is translated. Now, I started here with the Today's Living Bible translation, as this other translation was, and made a few modifications to it based on other translations. But I'm going to be explaining some things as we go along with it. Judges 19, starting in verse 1. At this time, before Israel had a king, there was a Levite living on the far side of the hill country of Ephraim, who brought home a girl from Bethlehem in Judah to be his concubine. But she became angry with him and ran away. Now, you read this in a number of translations, King James included, and it says she played the harlot against him and then left. Well, there's a word there that can be translated either to play the harlot or to become angry. And if you assume that the Levite's an upright guy, you can say, well, he's the victim here. His wife played the harlot against him. But if you assume, as the rabbinical tradition tells us, that he was something of a scapegrace, then you believe that she was angry. Now, why would she be angry? Well, it becomes clear if we continue on in this translation with the assumptions about him that we're making. She's angry with him because he's abusing her. He's an abusive spouse. And she leaves because she's tired of his nonsense. She became angry with him and ran away and returned to her father's home in Bethlehem. After 4 months had gone by. Now, this tells you something right here, doesn't it? This fellow's wife left, his concubine left. He didn't even go look for her for 4 months. After 4 months had gone by, her husband, taking along a servant and an extra donkey, went to see her and to try to win her back again. And here there's another word that can be translated more than one way. And in some translations there, just, he went to speak to her, but clearly the other translation is more persuasive, that he went to speak to her from the heart. He went to sweet talk her. He went to apologize, to try to get her back again. When he arrived at her home, she let him in and introduced him to her father, who was delighted to meet him. Her father urged him to stay a while, so he stayed 3 days, and they all had a very pleasant time On the fourth day, they were up early, ready to leave, but the girl's father insisted on their having breakfast first. Then he pleaded with him to stay one more day, as they were having such a good time. At first, the men refused, but his father-in-law kept urging him until finally he gave in. The next morning, they were up early again, and again the girl's father pleaded, just stay today and leave sometime this evening. So they had another day of feasting. Now, what's this father up to? Why doesn't he want the daughter to leave? Because he knows. He knows the Levite is mistreating her. He knows that her husband is abusive. He loves his daughter. He doesn't want her to go, and he's doing everything he can within honor's bound to try to keep her there. That afternoon, as he and his wife and servant were preparing to leave, his father-in-law said, look, it's getting late. Stay just tonight, and we'll have a pleasant evening together, and tomorrow you can get up early and be on your way. But this time the man was adamant, so they left, getting as far as Jerusalem, also called Jebus, before dark. His servant said to him, it's getting too late to travel. Let's stay here tonight. No. His master said, we can't stay in this heathen city where there are no Israelites. We'll go on to Gibeah or possibly Ramah. So they went on. The sun was setting, just as they came to Gibeah, a village of the tribe of Benjamin. So they went there for the night. But as no one invited them in, they camped in the village square. Just then, an old man came by on his way home from his work in the fields. He was originally from the hill country of Ephraim, but was living now in Gibeah, even though it was in the territory of Benjamin. When he saw the travelers camped in the square, he asked them where they were from and where they were going. We're on our way home from Bethlehem in Judah, the man replied. I live on the far edge of Ephraim in the hill country near Shiloh. But no one has taken us in for the night, even though we have fodder for our donkeys and plenty of food and wine for ourselves. Don't worry, the old man said, be my guest, for you mustn't stay here in the square. It's too dangerous. So he took them home with him. He fed their donkeys while they rested, and afterward they had supper together. Just as they were beginning to warm to the occasion, certain men of the city, sons of Belial himself, gathered around the house and began beating at the door and yelling at the old man to bring out the man who was staying with them so they could rape him. The old man stepped outside to talk to them. No, my brothers, don't do such a wicked thing, he begged, for he is my guest. Here, take my virgin daughter and this man's wife. I'll bring them out to you, and you can do whatever you like to them, but don't do such a thing to this man. But they wouldn't listen to him. What happens next? Then the girl's husband pushed her out to them, and they abused her all night. So the old man's daughter was spared. She wasn't put out. Just this man's wife, just the concubine. They abused her all night, taking turns raping her until morning. Finally, just at dawn, they let her go. She fell down at the door of the house and lay there until it was light. When her husband opened the door to be on his way, he found her there. Isn't this interesting? He didn't open the door to go look for her. He's packed and ready to go. He assumes she's dead. But he opens the door, and she's laying there at the door, fallen down in front of the door with her hands digging into the threshold. Well, come on, he said, let's get going. But she did not answer. Now, there are some translations here who add to the text. And they add to the text not on no authority, they add to the text on what is found in the Septuagint. In the original Hebrew text, all it says is she did not answer. In the Septuagint, it adds because she was dead. But that's a late addition to this text. At this point, the Bible doesn't say whether she's dead or alive. She was able to crawl to the door. She's there, digging into the threshold. He said, all right, he thinks she's alive. He talks to her. Come on, get up. Time to go. She did not answer. I think she's still alive. So he threw her across the donkey's back and took her home. When he got there, he took a knife and cut her body into 12 parts and sent one piece to each tribe of Israel. Now here, I followed the TLB in verse 29, where it says that he cut up her body. But again, that isn't what the Bible actually says. That isn't what the Hebrew text says there. What the Hebrew text says is that it's what it says in the ASV. And when he was coming to the house, he took a knife and laid hold of his concubine and divided her limb by limb into 12 pieces and sent her throughout the borders of Israel. He seized her. Again, I don't think she was dead when he took the knife to her. Now, I could be wrong. Doesn't really matter. The point is that if you assume that the rabbinical tradition is true, and this guy was a no good scapegrace and a wife beater, if I were an investigator investigating the death of this woman, I'd be going back to Gibeah to find out if this fellow conspired with the men who knocked on the door that night. To find out if he set it up while he was on his way through there in the first place. Because that's what I would suspect. Whether that could be proven or not, I don't know. But when he got her home, he finished her off. In this case, there's an old man in his home in a certain city. Two visitors come by. They're on their way to hell. And they visit that hell upon this man's household as they're passing through. Now, what's the point of that? Well, maybe it's a bit of a stretch. But my point this morning is simply this. We get visitors all the time. We encounter strangers all the time. We don't know where they're coming from. We don't know where they're going. All we know is what's presented to us. Lot didn't know that the two men who were staying with him were angels. And this man in Gibeah didn't know that this Levite was a son of the devil. Two sets of guests, both of them invited into the house. One was sent by heaven. The other was on its way to hell. They both pay a visit. They're both invited in. And this is something I can relate to on a personal level. Emily and I have entertained hundreds of strangers in our home over the years, some of whom may have been angels unawares, some of whom were real blessings to us. But we've also entertained people in our home who were on their way to hell. We've had people in our home who are now saving lives. My godson, Ronnie, he works for CPS. He's a supervisor and has saved the lives of dozens or hundreds of children in his line of work. My godson, Damon, is a firefighter. We entertained them in our home over and over and over for decades. And I think they're heaven sent to us. But we've also had people who stayed in our home who went on to commit murders. At least 3 that I know of that I could tell you their names right now if I wanted to. At least 1 young man that we entertained in our home is doing 40 to life for multiple counts of rape. We have people come into our homes. We have people come into our lives, people who intersect with us. We don't know where they come from. We don't know where they're going. All we know is that they're there. And that we're commanded to show hospitality to them. So we do. What we generally do is assume the best of people until they show us otherwise. I think it's the right thing to do. I bring this up because we're having this big event on January 8th. Now, our doors are always open to strangers. Our doors are always open to guests, always open to visitors. But we're making a point of inviting people on January 8th. We don't know who's going to come. We don't know where they come from. We don't know where they're going. But we will receive them as though they're blessings and treat them accordingly. We should be watching. We should be listening. Not everyone who comes to church does so because they want to find the Lord. Some people come to church because they want to make trouble. Leviticus 19:34, you shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Hebrews 13:2. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. 3 John 1:2-8. Beloved, I pray that all may go well with you and that you may be in good health as it goes well with your soul. For I rejoiced greatly when the brothers came and testified to your truth, as indeed you are walking in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in truth. Beloved, it is a faithful thing you do in all your efforts for these brothers, strangers as they are, who testified to your love before the church. You will do well to send them on their journey in the manner worthy of God, for they have gone out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from Gentiles. Therefore, we ought to support people like these, that we may be fellow workers for the truth. Luke 14:12-14. He said also to the man who had invited him, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. Revelation 3:20. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and sup with him, and he with me. That's my lesson for today.